Hi and welcome to Studio Marmalade. In this video we're going to have a look at one of the most iconic amplifiers from the mid-60s. It is the amp that may define pop music more than any other guitar amp through history. And of course we're talking about British manufactured Vox AC30. The history of the Vox AC30 is the history of the Jennings Musical Instrument Company. Jennings Musical Instrument Company, or JMI, was founded in the early 50s and were producing electronic organs to start with. In the late 50s they decided to also include guitar amplifiers in their line of production, so they started producing the AC15. The AC15 was basically the organ amplifier from the electronic organs taken out and put into a separate cabinet. It was an EL34 equipped 15-watt amp with a single 12-inch speaker. But the demand for higher output power amplifiers led to the construction of the AC30, which basically was an AC15 with a somewhat more powerful power amp. Both the AC15 and the AC30 were constructions of a man called Dick Denny, who was engineer at Jennings Musical Instrument at the time. And originally the AC30 was the same format as the AC15, that is a single 12-inch speaker combo amplifier. The owner of the company, Tom Jennings himself, was a bit reluctant in producing a higher power amplifier than the AC15, and therefore said that the new model AC30 could not be any larger in size, but actually fit in the same cabinet as the AC15. Since the AC30 required more tubes than the AC15, it was a bit tricky to fit the power section in the same chassis, in the same cabinet, and therefore Dick Denny, the engineer, redesigned the power section and went from the EL34 power tubes to the EL84, which are a bit smaller, in order to fit them into the chassis. At least that's what the legend says. In about the same time there were also market demands to make a dual speaker version of these amps in order to meet the competition with the amps such as the Fender Twin Reverb. Again, Tom Jennings was a bit reluctant into making a bigger amplifier, but it caved eventually, and the dual 12-inch speaker combo, the AC30 as we know it today, was born. The AC30 was built both as a combo amplifier with two internal 12-inch speakers, but also as a separate head and cabinet version such as this one, which is then labeled Super Twin. The story is that this very example of this amp has been used only in private use in a home for an organ or something like that, up until some 5 or 10 years ago when a friend of mine bought it. And recently he sold it to another friend of mine who has now asked me to have a look at it. So there's supposed to be nothing wrong at all with this one. It's supposed to be in brand new condition. So I'll open up and see what it looks like, if there are any capacitors need changing, and also I'm gonna try and test all the tubes, of course. So now it's time to open this amp, because we can't access the tubes in the AC30 without unscrewing the cabinet. And there we have it, all the components on this side, and the tubes are then on the other side of the amp. And I think that I can get the chassis out by just pulling out this board. I've taken the chassis out of the amp cabinet. I've also taken away the board on which the chassis is mounted. The chassis is somewhat different from Fender or Marshall chassis, which are usually just this bent tank. Bent sheet of metal like this. The Vox chassis has also this part, this L-shaped part, and it's quite a clever construction actually, which separates the power section and from the main tube section, so to say. So, or the preamp section actually. So what we have here is underneath. Well, we do have all the valves, all the tubes. We have the 5 ECC83s. No, sorry, the 4 ECC83s and 1 ECC82. And we have the EL84s and the GZ34 rectifier. And underneath that part of the chassis, and there are also mounted the power transformer, output transformer, and the choke. And also there's one capacitor, a dual 16 microfarad capacitor in the original scheme. But I found that this amp has been modified at some point. For instance, the tubes are not the originals, at least not the preamp tubes. The power tubes are Bremer. I'm actually not familiar with that, but they're old British tubes anyway. But there are 3 groove tubes in the preamp section and 1 Fender branded tube actually in the preamp section as well. So these are all not the originals, and also the rectifier is it might be original actually. It's National Electronics, so no, it's a USSR. It's a Russian tube. I don't think that's. I don't think that was original in this one. It should probably have been a British tube, rectifying tube from the beginning. Underneath the power tubes, or actually all the tubes, we have the 1, 2, 3, 4 EL34, EL84, sorry, and the rectifying tube. And we have then the power transformer over here. The choke is mounted under here. And the output transformer is here. This is one of the capacitors for the power section, and this is in the original schematic a dual 16 microfarad capacitor. However, this one mounted in this amp is a dual 47 microfarad capacitor, plus that it has this plastic nut which holds the capacitor in the chassis, which is something that doesn't actually really look really 1964 to me. So I think that this has been replaced, given both that the value is not the one specified in the schematic, and also that it actually looks slightly more modern than the 1964 construction. Apart from that, I don't think there are many components changed in this one. Actually, I do believe that the other capacitors are originals. And if we have a look at the amp section, it does look like we would expect this amp to look like. It's mounted on these lug boards. They're not actually like turret boards such as in Fender, but all straight mounting supports for the components. So it's a bit tricky to follow where everything goes, and there are also some wires that come in underneath the boards, which makes it a bit tricky. But I don't think I need to do that actually. I haven't powered this one up yet, so I'm not sure if everything is working as it should, but I think it should be working properly. That's what I've been told anyway. But we can also see here in this on this board, everything looks, or I should say most things look as they should. They look original. However, here we find 4 resistors that are not original 1964. These are more modern resistors. Actually, I can find another few over here that look more modern. So there has been some work done in this amp at some time, but it doesn't appear to have been modified. So these are probably just repairs. But it looks fine. It looks absolutely excellent to me. An interesting thing, I think, in a way, the output transformer to speaker connection. It appears as there are two possible outputs from the transformer. There's an 8 ohm output and a 16 ohm output. And this has been hardwired to the 16 ohm output, as the cabinet holds two 8 ohm speakers in series, which then leads us to 16 ohms in total. So it makes sense, it's perfectly alright. What I didn't know was that it actually had a dual impedance output transformer, so you could actually run this in an 8 ohm cabinet rather than a 16 ohm. But then you had to take out the chassis from the amp and screw the terminals to 8 ohm rather than 16. Very much work indeed just to change the output impedance, but it is possible. It is possible. So now I have reattached the wooden board to the chassis. I have rigged the amp. It's connected to my Variac, which is behind the Stratocaster here. I have connected the workbench speaker to the 8 ohm output of the output transformer, and I have connected one voltmeter to the filament supply, actually to the pilot light, but it's the same supply, and another voltmeter to the input, the power input of the amp, so I can see what input voltage we have. I have set the voltage selector to 225 volts, and we're ready to go. Power on, and power on the amp, and I can read 15 volts on the Variac, 35, 60 volts input power, and then we have 1.6 volts on the 6.3 volt filament, 86 volts input, 100, reading 2.8 volt on the filament, 28, reading 6.43 volts. If I take it up all the way to 230, 229, 230, it's in between there, I can read a 6.52 volts on the filament, which I'd say is close enough to the 6.3 volts. So the 225 volt primary winding on the power transformer seems to be the correct one for this. So if I turn up the volume for the first input, the speaker makes some noise. Second volume, speaker makes some noise, and the third volume, speaker makes some noise. Perfect. And we're reading still 6.5 volts on the filament and 230 volts on the primary winding of the power transformer. That is the input power. What I'm also going to do, I'm going to test all the tubes. I'm going to start with the vibrato tremolo channel. And just carefully tap the input side tubes. Turn up the normal channel. Okay, that's not quite... I don't quite like that. One of these tubes make a very distinct glossy noise in the speaker, meaning this tube is a bit microphonic. Actually, it's so much that when I tap the other tubes, I can actually hear it. Okay. And finally the brilliant channel. No noise there. Okay, and that's good. But the normal channel is making a bit of noise when I tap this tube there. The numbering of the tubes in the AC30 is a bit weird. If this was a Fender, the tubes would be numbered like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. But in this amp, for some reason, they are numbered. Yeah, follow my lead here. 1, 2. And I think it's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It makes no sense. So anyway, the tube that I'm looking at, this one, should then be it's the 1 second from the rectifier, should be tube 1. An ECC83 and number 1. And looking at the schematic, it makes sense because the tube 1 is the... Okay, that was a noise. Tube 1 is partially bright input and partially normal input. The ECC83 has 2 stages in them, 2 halves, and 1 half is driving the normal input and the other one is driving the bright input. So it seems like one of the halves of this tube, V1, is a bit microphonic. So I'm going to take out this, and this is not the original tube anyway, so I don't think it really matters very much. It's a GT tube. I'm going to replace it now with a JJ. And then it makes absolutely no noise, which was exactly what I was going for. This is not microphonic. I'm going to try the brilliant channel as well, because it shares the same tube. No microphonic tendencies whatsoever. A bit of hiss in the brilliant channel, but it does not seem to depend on the tube anyway. Try the vibrato. Or tremolo actually. The vibrato seems to be working. I'm going to try the normal channel. It's also working. And the brilliant channel. And just for the sake of it, let's try the other inputs as well. So these are the low inputs, these are the high. Yeah, all seems to be working actually. The tone knob works in reverse, so fully clockwise it's maximum treble roll-off, and counterclockwise it's full treble, because this is only like a tone control. As it says, it's tone control, it's not an equalizer, it's just a high frequency roll-off. But it works in reverse, I did not know that. Right, what I'm going to do now is put the the shielding covers of the preamp tubes back. I'm gonna power it off, obviously, and reconnect the 16 ohm speaker, or actually the wire, to the cabinet, and let's give it a try then in the original cabinet, the 2x12 with the Vox branded Celestion speakers in it. I have plugged in my Japanese Stratocaster, equipped with Tone Rider city limit pickups, and you can't see my pedal board right now, but all the pedals are off right now, and this is what it sounds like, clean. And I should also mention I have linked all the channels, so all channels are active, and normal and brilliant channel are somewhat equal in volume, while the tremolo, vibrato tremolo channel is turned down a bit. This is what it sounds like. Yeah, quite nice. Let's turn down the, or actually turn up the vibrato channel and turn on the vibrato. Sorry, this is the tremolo, of course. The tremolo and also the vibrato comes in 3 speeds, 3 flavors. But this is the slow one, so it goes faster. And even faster. For my liking, this is a bit too fast, all of them actually. But the vibrato is kind of nice, cool effect. Almost chorusy like. But then of course the vibrato on speed number 3 is a bit weird. Sounds like something stuck from a 50s space movie or something like that. There is no knob to adjust the depth of the vibrato tremolo, but I found that since I linked the channels, I can just turn down the vibrato channel, volume turned down all the way, and then just blend in the vibrato like this. If I turn off the other 2 channels, this is what the vibrato channel sounds like alone. So as you can hear, it's a very deep vibrato, sort of. I keep saying vibrato, it's a tremolo. I mean, we're all confused since Fender used to call the tremolo function and vibrato in their amplifiers. Anyway, I'm going to turn the tremolo off and turn the normal and brilliant channel back up again. And give it a bit of boost with the TC Spark. And give it a bit more boost or compression with the Boss CS3 compressor sustainer. And I found that also adding a bit of overdrive using the T-Rex Mudhoney gives it a very nice sound indeed. The Vox brand is a brand that has been passed on to many different owners through the years. Not at all as easy to follow, such as, for example, Fender or Marshall. The Vox brand has had no less than 8 different owners since it was established in the early 50s. Tom Jennings founded the Vox brand in the early 50s and ran it successfully actually up until the mid-60s. In 1964 he sold part of the shares in the company in order to get more capital to develop the company. He sold the shares to Royston Industries, but Royston Industries had no intention of expanding the Vox brand, at least not in the UK. And it didn't go too well, and the Royston Industries were filing for bankruptcy in 1968. What happened then was that some former executives at Vox founded the Vox Sound Equipment Limited, or VSEL, and ran the Vox brand for about a year, because the VSEL filed for bankruptcy in 1969. After that, a company called Corinthian Securities handled the bankruptcy and sold the company or the brand to Birch Stolek Industries in 1970. Birch Stolek ran the company up until 1973, when Dallas Musical Industries, or Dallas Arbiter, bought the company and ran it up until 1978. In 1978, Rose Morris bought the Vox brand. Rose Morris was the leading distributor in Europe at the time. They were distributing Marshall amplifiers throughout basically the entire European market. But to ensure that they had a sort of a wider portfolio than just the Marshall brand, they were a bit scared that they would lose the Marshall brand. So in order to secure their business, they bought the Vox brand to have that as sort of a backup. And Rose Morris ran Vox up until 1992, when it was purchased by Korg Musical Instruments, or Korg UK. And that is Korg, the keyboard manufacturer. And the Vox brand is still owned by Korg and are still making amplifiers as today. Talking about vintage Vox amplifiers, this is what we're actually looking for. JMI, Jennings Musical Instruments, produced amplifier from the early 60s. After Jennings sold the Vox brand to Royston Industries, the quality of the amps degraded, and it wasn't actually until the early 90s when Korg purchased the Vox brand again that the quality of the amps was anything like the glory days of the 60s. Korg produced amplifiers actually built by Marshall in the UK, which were basically copies, hand-wired, point-to-point sort of copies of the JMI era Vox AC30s. And today you can still buy a brand new Vox AC30. I don't think they're made in the UK anymore. I think they're made in China or perhaps India, I'm not quite sure. And they're supposed to be really good amps. However, the amps sold as AC30s today are very different from the original AC30s, such as this one. I'm not saying they're bad in any way, but they're different. Because when you say Vox AC30, this is what you're actually meaning, the Vox AC30/6. The /6 means it got 6 inputs. So these very early ones, they only have the 6 controls, 3 volume controls, that is 1 for each channel. It got 1 tone knob, which is global for the entire amp, and it got 2 vibrato tremolo controls. 1 to select between the vibrato tremolo, and the other one to set the speed in 3 different steps. This is the construction from the late 50s, and the very first AC30s were actually called AC30/4 because they had 4 inputs and only then 2 channels. In the early 60s there was a modification to the circuit provided by Vox as an add-on to the original amplifier, the original Vox AC30, and that modification was a top boost circuit. There was a demand for more brilliance, more treble in the sound, so what the engineers, I guess Dick Denny at Vox did, was to construct a treble boost, more or less. And that is a circuit that you could retrofit in the AC30 on the back panel, which added 1 extra tube, 1 ECC83 or 12AX7, and also added 2 tone controls, a bass and treble control. This is not the top boost version. It has not been modified. However, you can see on the back panel of the cabinet that there is a cavity, a hole in the back plate where you should fit the top boost circuit. And the top boost circuit was most often installed by the Vox factory actually, and if not by the factory, then by the shop where you would buy the amplifier. And somewhat later there was also a top boost model which then incorporated this extra tube and the extra bass and treble controls on the same panel as the rest of the controls, which then led to a total of 8 controls. 3 volume controls, a treble, a bass, still the tone control or then renamed cut, and the 2 vibrato tremolo controls. And that's all. The AC30 is one loud amplifier. It's rated at only 30 watts, and this concept of power ratings in guitar amplifiers is an interesting concept, and I shall do a video on that topic another time, but it's well known to be very, very loud.